A man sits on a stone at the edge of a field, watching people pass without greeting them, speaking to himself as though arguing with ghosts. The man says people think he is lonely because he walks alone, that they whisper he is broken, angry, or lost, and that everyone keeps trying to pull him back into noise, into crowds, into explanations, as if silence itself were a disease. A bird lands near him, not startled, not impressed. The bird says humans fear what they cannot read, and they call it loneliness because danger sounds kinder than truth. The man smirks. The man says isolation ruins men, that history proves it, that no man survives alone without becoming bitter or cruel, and that withdrawing from people is how you disappear. The bird tilts its head, voice steady but sharp. The bird says there are three kinds of isolated men, and only one of them is truly lost. The man looks up now, interested despite himself. The bird says the first is the wounded one, the man who did not choose silence but was pushed into it by loss, betrayal, failure, or shame. The man who already lost the family, the name, the safety you are still afraid to lose, and because of that you cannot threaten him anymore, because fear works only on men who still believe they have something left to protect. The man exhales slowly, as if something personal was touched. The bird continues, saying this man is not dangerous yet, but he is unpredictable because pain has stripped illusions from him, and you never know whether he will heal into wisdom or rot into rage. The man mutters that this sounds familiar. The bird does not respond, but continues. The bird says the second is the voluntary isolator, the man who saw the game clearly, saw how approval is traded like currency, how belonging demands obedience, how systems reward noise and punish depth, and instead of fighting for a seat at the table, he stood up and walked away, not angry, not loud, just done. The man laughs quietly and says society hates that kind of man. The bird agrees, saying systems need participation to survive, and a man who refuses to clap, consume, chase, or perform starves them without throwing a single stone, which is why they call him lazy, antisocial, proud, or lost, because they cannot say the truth that he is free. The man's smile fades. The bird says this man no longer bends for applause, no longer explains himself, and no longer seeks mirrors in other people's eyes to know who he is. A long pause, wind moving through the grass. Then the bird says the third man is the one nobody notices until it is too late. The man straightens. The bird says this one does not announce withdrawal, does not preach awakening, does not argue online, does not prove anyone wrong, because he understands something most humans never learn, that time exposes truth better than conflict ever could. The man whispers, what does he do then? The bird answers that he waits, builds quietly, prays deeply, roots himself beyond approval, and by the time people realize he no longer responds to their opinions, their insults, or their praise, he is already living in a world that replaced them entirely. The man frowns and says that sounds cold, even arrogant. The bird says no. Arrogance needs witnesses, and this man has none, only direction. The man protests, saying humans need humans, that isolation breaks the soul. The bird corrects him gently, saying loneliness is what happens when a man runs from himself, but solitude is what happens when he finally stays, and the difference is that loneliness weakens while solitude forges. The man looks down at his hands. The bird says, do not confuse silence with emptiness, do not mistake withdrawal for bitterness, and do not mock a man just because he stopped explaining his journey to people who were never part of his assignment. The man finally asks, almost afraid. The man asks what makes such a man truly dangerous. The bird answers softly. The bird says, because you cannot control a man who threw your approval in the trash, you cannot manipulate a man who no longer needs to belong, and you cannot stop a man whose roots are deeper than your noise. The bird lifts its wings slightly, preparing to leave, and before it goes it says, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. He is like a tree planted by streams of water. Psalm 1:1-3. The man remains seated, realizing that maybe he was not lonely after all, maybe he was becoming rooted.